Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch my UCARE research video. My name is Shelby Warrick, and I am a landscape architecture student at UNL, and this summer I did research on Fort Kearny State Historical Park. Currently, the State Historical Park is in the process of undergoing master planning on the site in order to welcome and engage visitors in an authentic experience. This research was completed with the goal of aiding in that master planning process. The image to the right is from a 2018 design charrette where ideas were generated for this design process. The objective of this research on Fort Kearny State Historical Park is to aid in the upcoming Game and Parks master planning process by finding and disseminating baseline historical data that could be incorporated into a cultural landscape inventory. Some background on Fort Kearny is that the fort was active from 1848 until 1871 and was established by the U.S. Army to provide supplies and protection to Oregon Trail travelers. Several westward trails converged near the fort by the Platte River, and so many westward emigrants used and traveled by this fort, and it became a hub for those emigrants. And Fort Kearny was additionally constructed with the intention of gaining possession of land that had presently belonged to native peoples on the Great Plains. Methods that I used for this research included identifying, locating, and reading primary sources, synthesizing findings from the sources with cultural landscape inventory categories, and creating a digital library and an annotated bibliography based off of the literature review method. So some examples of primary sources that I used for this research included aerial photographs and historic maps, correspondence from people who were either stationed at the fort or traveling through the fort, archaeological records, and government documents. Cultural landscape inventory is an inventory from the National Park Service and the purpose of the CLI is to gather information about the location and historic and cultural characteristics of a landscape in order to know what we need to preserve on the site. And so the categories that we looked at this summer included plan graphics and inventory, National Register information, chronology and physical history, and bibliography. So the annotated bibliography is organized into CLI categories, including the historical maps, photographs, architectural drawings and surveys, archaeological records, correspondence, government documents, articles, essays, and books, and finally databases. And likewise, the digital library, where I compiled all these sources, is organized in that same way as the bibliography. So for the results for the chronology and physical history of the site, one of the primary sources that I looked at included the restoration plan that was done in 1948 on the site. And from all of these sources, I really got a good idea of the chronology of major events during the fort period, so from 1848 through 1871. And the National Register document provided a physical history on the site from 1848 through the 1960s. And so some limitations for this research is that our sources had limited information on physical changes since the park period and before the fort period. So some future research would include locating documents pertaining to other eras of the fort, such as pre-fort, homestead era, post-park era, etc. And this image here to the right is from a chronology done by University of Pennsylvania, and as you can see, they have included they've included eras and events from long before the site was created, and as what its main historical period is, and so we would like to do that for the fort as well. And then for plan graphics and inventory, an example of a primary source I looked at were the Grange documents, which were archaeological records. And one of the main results from this research included a site boundary being really well defined. And some limitations were that the archaeological survey was completed prior to park construction. And so for future research, we would like to consider redoing the archaeological research after the park period, generating a site survey, and also finding reconstruction documents to gather more information on the buildings that have been reconstructed since the fort period. And then finally for results, we also got some information for the National Register, And our primary source was a National Register document from the 1960s. And the main result that we found was the fort period was well defined. And some limitations include that the document could be amended to include the park planning and homestead eras, and there's limited information on other narratives, such as the Platte River Valley and Native peoples living nearby. And so future research could include fort structures could be eligible for the National Register, as well as researching more information to find more narratives about the cultural and historical integrity of Fort Kearny. So in conclusion, some future research could include expanding our knowledge of geographic information, including history on transportation and tourism in connection to the park planning period, expanding the context of the fort's narrative to include a more inclusive narrative for interpretation, and landscape analysis of interpretation, which would include making period plans. Thank you so much for watching my research video on Fort Kearny. I really enjoyed doing this research, and I am excited to see how it may impact the master planning process on Fort Kearny.